Another thing, which wasn't actually on your list, Brian, so I understand why you didn't think of it right now, and I've completely forgotten what it was.
That's
so
because you made the list.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, where hosts Brian Leverage and Jeffrey Holst pour our old fashioned real estate advice.
Episode 25.
Before we get to our next episode, we encourage you to go to our website, oldfashionedrealestate.com, and click the store link to get some good swag that we would be more than happy to sell you.
You can buy something like this, the old-fashioned real estate shirts. These shirts are amazing. I wear them like all the time. So if you've seen me around town or around the country, around the world, you'll see that I'm wearing the shirt like almost everywhere. I have a whole stack of them. I don't wear.
He's only got one, and it's really durable.
No, I have more than one actually. But listen, they're only $15 on our website. We also have things like we don't have them here. We should, but we have glasses like this with our old-fashioned logo
hats,
on
which
them.
are really cool.
Yep. And one of our guests has been wearing our hat all around the world.
Yes.
But we appreciate it, and thanks for checking out the store.
Have a good one. And
go.
Welcome back to another episode of the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. I'm Brian Leverage.
And I'm Jeffrey Holst.
That's right. And we're glad to be back here with you again today. Tell us, Jeff, what are we talking to our listeners about?
I forget. No. No, we're going to talk about the ways to increase your net operating income in apartment investments.
Okay. Net operating income, or NOI, as most people commonly refer to it, because it's a lot shorter.
That's
not to state the massively obvious.
No, you actually did state the massively obvious there. But so net operating income is, and we've defined this before, but just to make it easy, the total operating income is all the income that you receive less gross income minus all of your expenses, excluding things like debt service, essentially. So, and it's really important when you're evaluating the value of a property, particularly in a multifamily property. So we did an episode, which I believe was show 19, on cap rates and why cap rates are important, and that kind of relates to this. When you're valuing a property based on a capitalization rate, the higher the net operating income, the higher the value of the property.
Exactly.
And that's why people want to increase their operating income.
Sure. So we'll jump right into it. So from the income perspective, first thing you can do, the easiest, is rent increases, right? Because if you're buying something where the rents are some factor below what the market rents are for comparable units, the quickest way is to take the rents up to market.
Yeah, and actually you bring up a good point. So there's really only two ways to increase your net operating income. One is to increase your income, and the other is to reduce your expenses. And I think we'll probably take those separately. So like you said, raising rents is the most obvious way to increase your income. If you increase your income, then you should also be increasing your net operating income.
Right.
There are other ways to increase your income besides just rents, though. One thing that people do is they look at their fees, like late fees, application fees, credit reporting fees, things like that. There are other fees, too, that you use in your business, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. As you already stated, there's application fees and late fees. Those can be taken into consideration.
And those are probably the most common of the fees.
Most renters these days have some form of pet. I think the statistics are somewhere around 70%, whether that be a goldfish, hamster, cat, or dog. The majority of renters these days have some type of pet. So
you'd have fees on the front end, like additional security deposit, potentially some pet rent, like a monthly fee. And if you, just on that pet issue, if you're owning a multifamily property and you don't accept pets now, you can also consider the possibility of adding a pet policy that allows pets in there.
Yeah. Another one you can take a look at is utility income, and that is, with multifamily properties, typically you might have just one water meter handling all of the units. So you could look at an option like sub-metering or doing a RUBS or utility bill back, by where you recapture that revenue that goes out towards those expenses, which we'll get on in the second half here.
Yeah, and so when you're talking about a utility bill back, what you're saying basically is you tell your tenants that their water and electric or whatever particular utilities you're billing back are X dollars per month, and maybe it's based on the number of people that are living there or whatever it might be. But if you get, say, a 20-unit apartment complex and you're able to get an additional $30 per month in utility bill backs, then that's 30 times 20 times 12 added directly to your net operating income.
Yeah, exactly. Another common thing we're seeing with multifamily properties these days is offering some type of on-site storage. Maybe not like public storage type buildings, but sometimes there will be outbuildings that can be converted into small closets with locks, and you can charge some kind of nominal rent for those as well.
Yeah, and I've seen in a couple of my complexes, we have almost like cages in the basement that we rent out. You also see like sheds that are converted into storage, or actual storage buildings being put up on the property. And sometimes those are available only to tenants, and other times they might even be run like a separate business and be available to the general public. Another way that you could add income would be through laundry income, and this can come in a couple of different ways. One thing you could do is just put coin-operated laundry machines into the basement or into a secondary building. But you could also rent out laundry if there's in-unit hookups. You could rent out laundry machines as a way to get additional income, or you could simply put in hookups for laundry. In some cases, I have an apartment complex. It's a small one that we actually had some units with laundry hookups and some without, and we've replumbed it to add laundry hookups and then just increase the rent as a result of having that. So that's not really laundry income, but people are willing to pay more if they have in-unit laundry typically.
So one of the other things you can do as well, which gets into almost expense management as well, is most apartment operators are going to be rehabbing the units, but what you can do with your existing tenant base is offer them upgraded units at a premium compared to what they're paying. And that might include something like changing out flooring, going with like a hard surface flooring like LVT or LVP. Maybe you do an accent paint color, from a small palette with which people can choose so you can keep it consistent, etc. But people, when they can kind of personalize to an extent, they're willing to pay for that.
Yeah, and the accent paint's an interesting thing to talk about. There's a trend in multifamily now where they're letting people pick their paint colors. And if you pick your paint color, if you're going to be painting anyway, it doesn't really matter to you, I guess, as an owner what the paint color is, but people are willing to pay extra to have their child's room painted pink or their whatever it might be. Another thing, I think you kind of alluded to this, and we'll get into it more in expenses, but a lot of times if you have higher end finishings, people treat it better, so you have less wear and tear.
You're attracting a better quality renter overall.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. And then another one would be like stone countertops or new cabinets. There's all sorts of things like that you can do that really do attract higher rent points, which is really important because, again, the higher the income that you have, the higher your net operating income is by default.
Parking is also a revenue generator as well. A lot of multifamily, especially older buildings, usually have some type of limited parking situation. So you could set up some type of a system where it's either a lottery or, you could charge maybe a little bit more for spots that are closer to the building, etc.
And I've seen this too. A lot of times they'll have numbered parking spots directly in front of a unit if you have individual units, but there might be some covered parking and some non-covered parking, and you pay extra for this. The first apartment complex, the only apartment complex I've ever personally lived in, had a covered parking option, and that was up in Michigan, so covered parking was very valuable, right? In the winter in Michigan, you don't want to be out exposed to the elements if you could, and they were getting $75 a month for one parking spot. And that's significant, and they probably had 100 parking spots. So that's $7,500 a month, an extra income that apartment complex owner was getting.
Right.
For really very little extra expense.
There's almost no expense associated with it, exactly. So something else you can look at doing is shorter term rentals. Those are all the rage these days, STRs as people call them, where you could maybe furnish a couple of your units put them on Airbnb or VRBO or one of those shorter term sites.
Sure. And I mean, obviously, you'd have to look into the regulations locally and make sure you're complying with laws. But I mean, we're not talking about taking the whole apartment complex and doing this. We're talking about taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe like 4 or 5% of the total units in that building, and converting them over to short-term rental. Obviously, there's additional costs associated with that, but it's just a math problem. If you can get more rent, enough more rent to cover the additional cost, then you're increasing your net operating income.
Exactly. And then you've got other add-ons which aren't necessarily applicable to all properties. It's location specific, but things such as like billboards or cell phone towers or vending machines, which are much more commonplace.
Sure, and if you have a laundry room, you might put a soap vending machine in or a candy vending machine in. And another thing, which wasn't actually on your list, Brian, so I understand why you didn't think of it right now, and I've completely forgotten what it was. So
because you made the list.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Well, I think another thing that I was going to say is that this is a thing where finding new sources of income is super important, and we can't understate how important it is, right? And it's about creativity. What I was going to mention that I forgot and now remembered is that there are now places that will do like UPS drop boxes, and they'll charge a service. So they'll have someone like at a front desk or something like that, and people can bring in the UPS and have it contained in like a centralized office or something like that.
Right. So I think we've covered about 10 or so income-focused aspects to increasing your NOI. Of course, the other half of NOI is expense management, principally reducing it. And with that being said, there's a number of different ways you can affect your expenses as well. One of the big ones is reducing your turnover time or cost between units, which, of course, that goes to a number of different factors like how you screen.
Sure, and we did an entire episode. Show 12 was about tenant screening, and then you should definitely watch that episode. But I mean, if you screen your tenants better, you're going to have less turnover. If you have less turnover, you're going to have more income and less expense associated with turnover.
And one thing, too, as an add-on to that is, typically you're looking for people with solid rental histories, people that are moving every 12 months or even with more frequency than every 12 months. You're going to be taking somebody that's going to be leaving. So if you can find somebody for the same unit that has, say, 18 to 24 month average, you're going to be making more.
Sure. And in apartment complexes, the average tenant's going to stay about 18 months, but some tenants will stay 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. Other tenants will only stay for a partial term. They might only be there 6 months and move out in the middle of the night. And you want to avoid the 6-monthers and get the 5 years if you can. And there's something to be thought about there, actually, is that I think that tenant turnover costs are one of the most understated costs when you're looking at like a pro forma and thinking about buying. A lot of times people will say, oh, I have 5% bad debt or whatever. But the truth of the matter is it's actually, if it's not managed properly, it can be the most expensive thing on your expense.
Yeah. And I mean, that's where when you're doing your remodels, you want to take a long-term approach to what you're installing. For instance, hard surface flooring, like we touched on, that typically lasts 20 years or longer if it's maintained well and people don't trash it. But what is not arguable is that it's going to last significantly longer than carpet.
Which you're probably going to replace almost every tenant.
Yeah, and so carpet is roughly about half the price
Maybe a third the price to
about half the price of a solid surface floor, hard surface floor, but you're going to realize those expense savings down the line on future turnovers.
And sometimes people do prefer carpet. So like bedrooms, sometimes, especially in higher end places, you often will see carpet. But if you can add some hard surfaces in the common areas, you can reduce the cost of turnover. And even if you're talking about just eliminating carpet cleaning costs, even if you could save the carpet, there's still cost to that. And then, of course, the more durable finishes can be things like we mentioned before, hard, stone countertops. I mean, a granite countertop is nearly unbreakable. I mean, they could break it if they wanted to, but they're not going to accidentally damage granite.
It's aesthetically more pleasing and, like you said, far more durable.
Yeah, and of course, granite is expensive relative to buying like typical, countertopping, but It's not as much more expensive as most people think.
No, roughly about twice the price.
Yeah,
depending on the
two to
layout.
2.5 times the price.
So, a lot of expenses with multifamily properties tend to be fixed, like property taxes and insurance. For instance, I mean, there's a little variability on the insurance, but one of the biggest expenses that you can focus on from a management standpoint is the utilities. So we talked about, billing back from the income perspective, but you can also do an expense management on utilities as well.
And on a personal note here, the first apartment complex I ever bought was a 12-unit building with a single water bill. And when I bought it, the water bill was averaging between $650 and $700 a month. By putting in aerators, right, the faucet aerators, actually putting in dishwashers, because people, when they're washing their dishes, they just run a lot more water through, and then putting in some low flow kinds of toilets and things like that, we've been able to reduce that water bill from $650 a month down to $350 a month. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we've maybe spent on that $15,000 on all these improvements that we've made, and we're saving $350 a month, which over the course of a year means we're basically getting our money back, about 25% on our money.
But it's about $4,000, and when you apply that at, say, a 10 cap, which in
it's
this
a
market is
$40,000
it's
equity
paid for
increase.
itself.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I would say that we've probably created $50,000 in equity by reducing the water expenses.
No, that's great. LED lighting being another one. If you've got house lighting that you as the owner are paying for, going with longer bulbs and lower energy consumption, fixtures, etc., are also helpful.
Well, and fixtures in general, like this goes back to durability, but even inside the tenant places where you're not saving on the utility bill necessarily, you might part of the time, because when the unit's vacant, you're paying that, so you will save some there, but the fixtures like light bulbs and stuff like that can make a lot of difference because they last a lot longer, and you're gonna replace them less often.
Kind of an aside to this too, a lot of people may not know that you can actually appeal your property tax assessments and potentially get them reduced. There are companies out there that offer these services, probably in just about every market. And typically what they'll do is they will, on your behalf, work for you. They'll look at similar comps for other apartment buildings, and they're going to try to find the lower valued comps from an assessment purpose standpoint. They're going to take those to the assessor's office and try to reduce your assessment, and thus saving you money. And typically those savings get split 50-50, but there's no arguing that getting that reduction impacts your bottom line.
Of course, you can do this yourself too. You don't have to hire a company to do it, but these people specialize in it, and they can do a really good job as a result of that.
And if they don't get it reduced, they don't get paid.
That's right. But we have had some luck. My partner Travis and I, of course, Travis is an attorney, so he maybe has a little bit of a sophistication in that particular area that other people might not have. But we've had some luck in reducing our property taxes, and it might not sound that much, but even if you had to hire someone and actually pay them to do it, if you got a 20-30% reduction in property taxes over the life of your property, that makes an enormous difference.
Absolutely. So, something else to take a look at too is, some of your expenses, whether they be for things like trash or landscaping, etc., that are common on a month-to-month basis, you can have those rebid by other vendors to make sure you're getting competitive pricing. And the same holds true with your insurance as well. Typically your first year tends to be the most attractive from a price point, but then what a lot of owners don't do is look at that those premiums continue to increase over time.
I think you should re-quote your insurance at least every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I think the first year or two, it doesn't make that much difference. If you got a good price on the front end, you're probably fine for a couple of years. But like you said, especially if you haven't had any claims, you might very well be paying a higher rate than you need to. So that's definitely something that's really important. So that's all I have. Do you have any other ideas of how to reduce expenses?
No, I think we've covered it. This is probably one of our longer episodes at this point.
No, not too bad. I think we're going to be okay. But anyway, we really appreciate you tuning in. And as always, if you haven't subscribed, we would love it if you would subscribe to our show, and also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places that you can find the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. Thank you very much.
Cheers
and cheers.
for now.